The cold wind pushed against the small town like it had something to prove. Every street lamp flickered from the pressure of it. People hurried along the sidewalks with their collars raised and their hands buried deep inside their pockets. December had only begun, but it already felt like winter wanted to swallow everything whole. Lena walked quickly along, the same street she took every morning and every night. Her backpack slid off one shoulder, the zipper half broken, but she didn't bother fixing it. She was already late for her shift, and the last thing she needed was her manager giving her another lecture. She worked at a small grocery store, a place where holiday music played on a loop, and everyone pretended to feel cheerful, even when the cold made it hard to smile as she hurried inside. Warm air hit her face, but it didn't bring comfort. Her mind was too full. Bills were overdue, rent was increasing again next month, and her mother's treatment costs had risen without warning. She had tried to hide the stress from her family, but her younger brother had already noticed the extra hours she was working and the way she skipped meals sometimes. He didn't say anything, but she knew he could see the struggle. She clocked in and forced a smile at her coworker, who was already decorating the counter with tinsel. Everything around her looked festive: fake snow, red ribbons, little bells tied to baskets, but none of it could distract her from the numbers running through her mind. She didn't need decorations. She needed a miracle. Hours passed slowly. Customers came and went with their holiday shopping lists. Some chatted about holiday plans, others complained about the cold, and a few liked to share every detail of their day. Lena helped them all with the same gentle patience she always had, even when she felt herself breaking on the inside. She never let it show to strangers. By the afternoon, her feet ached. The holiday playlist had looped for the 4th time. Her shift ended, but she didn't get to rest. She had a second job waiting a night shift at a diner on the other side of town. She rushed out of the store, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. The sun had already started to set, even though it wasn't late. Winter days were short, and it made everything feel heavier. The diner was warm, filled with the smell of soup and grilled sandwiches. It was always busy around dinner time, and her shift was packed with orders. She moved fast, balancing trays, pouring drinks, smiling even when she was exhausted. She had learned long ago that customers liked to feel cared for. Even if they only stayed for a few minutes, between orders, she reached into her apron to check her phone. 2 missed calls from the hospital. Her stomach tightened. She stepped into the back hallway, away from the noise, and dialed them back. Her heart pounded as she waited for someone to answer. A nurse picked up and gently explained that her mother's treatment costs had changed again. Lena listened quietly, nodding even though no one could see her. Every word made her chest feel tighter. She thanked the nurse, hung up, and leaned her head against the wall. She wanted to cry, but a voice called her name from the kitchen. She wiped her face quickly and went back to work. By the time she left the diner, it was close to midnight. The cold air felt sharper, and the streets were almost empty. Lena walked slowly, her breath visible in little clouds. Her hands were numb, but she didn't mind. She had been too tired to feel much of anything lately. As she passed a small cafe that stayed open late, she stopped for a moment. The lights inside were soft and warm, and people sat at tables with their hands wrapped around mugs. For a moment, she wished she could walk in, sit down, and forget her problems. Just for 10 minutes. Just long enough to breathe, but she couldn't afford it, not the time, not the money. Still, her legs moved before she could stop them. She pushed the door open gently, just to warm up for a little while. The bell above the door chimed, and a few people looked up, then went back to their conversations. She walked to the counter and ordered the cheapest drink they had, feeling guilty even as she did it. She told herself she would make up for the cost by skipping something else tomorrow. Maybe lunch. The young barista handed her the drink, and she turned to leave. But as she stepped aside, she accidentally bumped into someone standing behind her. Hot coffee spilled from her cup and splashed onto the stranger's coat. "Oh my gosh, Sheem's so sorry," Lena said immediately, her eyes widening. The man looked down at the stain on his expensive-looking coat. He seemed surprised but not angry. Instead, he let out a small laugh, not the annoyed kind, but one that sounded like he hadn't laughed in a long time. "It's all right," he said, shaking his head. "It was an accident." Lena apologized again, but the man waved it off. He stepped toward the counter to order another drink. And Lena couldn't help noticing how out of place he looked in the small cafe. His watch, his coat. The way he carried himself, everything about him, hinted at a life far different from hers. She stepped to the side, waiting for her drink to be remade, but she felt his eyes on her. Not in a rude way, but in a curious way. She wondered if he noticed how tired she looked, or how worn out her clothes were. She hoped not. He didn't say anything else, and neither did she. They both waited silently until her drink was ready again. She took it, thanked the barista, and walked out quickly. Embarrassed by the whole moment, she didn't know the stranger watched her leave, his eyes lingering for a moment longer than they should have, as if he sensed something hidden behind her hurried steps. Outside, the wind felt colder. She walked home slowly, her mind going back to the hospital bills. She tried to stay positive, but the weight on her shoulders felt heavier each day. When she reached her apartment, she tiptoed inside so she wouldn't wake her brother. He had school in the morning, and she didn't want him worrying about her. She changed quietly, washed up, and sat on the edge of her bed. The room was small, but she had placed some old holiday decorations around to make it feel warm. A tiny string of lights hung above the window, glowing softly. They reminded her of better Christmases when her family was younger, healthier, and happier. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't know how she would get through the month. She didn't know how she would pay for everything, but she had to try. She had to keep going. She lay down slowly, the blanket pulled up to her chin. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to rest. She stared at the small lights until her eyes grew heavy. Somewhere across town, in a penthouse filled with silence and luxury, the man from the cafe stood by his window. Thinking about the girl who spilled coffee on him, he didn't know her name or her story, but something about her tired eyes stayed with him. He didn't know yet that their worlds were about to collide again, and Lena didn't. Know that the stranger she had bumped into would soon change her life in a way she'll never imagined. Not just for Christmas, but forever. Morning arrived with a soft gray sky and a cold breeze slipping through the half-closed window of the apartment. Lena woke up before her alarm, her mind already racing with the things she needed to do. She lay still for a moment, listening to the quiet breathing of her younger brother in the next room. He always slept so peacefully, and she wished she could give him a life where peace wasn't such a luxury. She got up quietly, wrapped a sweater around herself, and went to the kitchen. There wasn't much there, some bread, a little butter, and leftover soup from the night before. She prepared breakfast for her brother first, knowing he would leave for school soon. She kept her own meal light, almost nothing, because she needed to stretch the groceries for as long as possible as she packed his lunch. He walked into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled. She smiled at him. "Morning. Eat before you leave." Sat down and began eating, still half asleep. Lena watched him quietly, wishing she could give him more better food, nicer clothes, a calmer home. But wishes didn't pay bills. After he left for school, she sat at the table and opened the envelope she had been avoiding. The rent notice. The landlord had given her 2 weeks to cover the difference or leave. She stared at the paper until the words blurred, then folded it up and placed it inside a drawer. She would deal with it later. She always found a way, even when it felt impossible. By the afternoon, she headed to her shift at the diner. The place was half full when she arrived, and she tied her apron quickly, falling into the rhythm of work. She greeted customers, took orders, and brought plates to tables while pushing her worries aside. But they kept coming back, especially when her phone vibrated in her pocket. She checked it during a break. One new message from the hospital asking her to call as soon as possible. Her chest tightened. She didn't respond. Not yet. She needed a moment to breathe as she stepped outside to take a short break. She saw a familiar face passing by on the sidewalk. It was the man from the cafe, the one whose coat she'd ruined the night before. She froze for a second, unsure if she should wave or pretend she didn't notice him. He noticed her first. "You again," he said with a half smile as he approached. His tone wasn't mocking. It was amused, as if fate was playing a joke by crossing their paths twice. Lena felt herself blush with embarrassment. I really am sorry about your coat, shook his head. I told you, it's fine. Besides, I needed an excuse to stop wearing that one. She let out a small laugh. He seemed relaxed, calm, but something about his eyes carried a heaviness, as if he too had a world of problems he didn't talk about. What are you doing here? She asked. Just walking, he said. I needed some air. She nodded. She understood that feeling too well. Before either of them could say more, her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, and guilt washed over her. She didn't want to take the call in front of a stranger, so she excused herself. Sorry, I have to get back inside. He nodded politely, though he seemed curious. She turned away and rushed back into the diner. The rest of her shift was long and busy. The dinner rush came early, and she barely had a moment to rest. But eventually things slowed down. She stepped into the back hallway, pulled out her phone, and finally returned the call. The hospital explained that her mother's condition required another procedure. Without it, things could get worse. They gave her a number, the amount she needed to pay. Her heart dropped. It was far more than she had expected. Far more than she could manage. She thanked them softly, hung up, and stood there motionless. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not here. Not while she still had hours of work left. The kitchen door swung open. Her manager poked his head out. Lena, table 6, needs refills. She nodded quickly, wiped her face, and went back to work as if nothing had happened. But inside, everything felt like it was breaking later that night. After she clocked out, she walked home slowly. The wind was sharp, and the street was quiet except for a few distant cars. She tried not to think about the number the hospital had told her. She tried not to imagine what would happen if she couldn't pay. She reached her building and took the stairs quietly. Her brother was asleep, and she didn't want to wake him. She changed out of her uniform and went to sit in the small living room. Staring out of the window at the dark sky, she didn't know how long she sat there. Long enough for her body to stop feeling the cold. Long enough for her mind to spiral through every possible solution and find nothing. Her life had always been difficult. But this time, she felt cornered. There were moments in life, she thought, where strength wasn't enough. Moments when a person needed help but didn't know where to find it. Somewhere else in the city? The man she had run into, the man who had laughed at Spilled. Coffee stood in a quiet room inside his family's large estate. He had returned home after years, and it felt strange being there. His family expected him to be someone he no longer was. They expected him to attend the Christmas gala, smile for pictures, pretend everything in his life was perfect. His grandmother had already asked if he was bringing someone to the gala this year. It's been too long, she had said lovingly but firmly. You should settle down, dear. You need someone beside you. He had simply smiled and changed the subject. But the pressure weighed heavily on him. He walked through the quiet halls of the estate and stared out the tall windows at the snowy fields. His life was comfortable, wealthy, filled with opportunities others could only dream of. Yet somehow, he felt more trapped than ever. His thoughts drifted back to the girl from the diner. Something about her tired eyes had stayed in his mind longer than he expected. There was a softness in her voice, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself. He wondered why their paths had crossed twice in 2 days. Maybe fate was strange like that. The next evening, Lena returned to the diner for another shift. She didn't expect anything unusual to happen. It was just another day in a long line of tiring days. But as she walked in, she saw him sitting at a corner table, the same man. Again, she stared for a moment, unsure whether to approach or wait for him to leave. But he met her eyes and raised a hand slightly, greeting her. She walked over slowly. Hi, I didn't expect to see you again, he smiled. I came for dinner, and maybe to apologize for stopping you yesterday. I just had something to take care of. Her voice shook just a little. He noticed. Are you all right? He asked, lowering his tone. She forced a small smile. Just a long week. He didn't push. He seemed like the kind of person who could sense when someone didn't want to open up. She took his order and went back to the kitchen. But her mind wasn't calm. Something about him made her uneasy, not in a bad way, but in a way that made her aware of her own life, the huge difference between his world and hers. When she brought his food, he looked at her thoughtfully. "I'm sorry if this sounds forward," he said gently, "but you seem like you're carrying something heavy. I don't know what it is, but if you ever need someone to talk to even just for a moment, I don't mind listening." Lena froze. She didn't know why his words affected her. Maybe it was because she had been holding everything alone for so long. Maybe because he spoke with genuine concern instead of pity. But she shook her head with a polite smile. "Thank you. That's kind. But I'll be okay." He nodded, though he didn't fully believe her. After he left, she found a generous tip under his plate, far more than the cost of the meal. She looked around to see if he was still near the door, but he was gone. She took the money in her hand. Her heart caught between gratitude and guilt. She didn't want charity. She wanted stability. She walked home later that night with her mind spinning faster than the wind outside. She didn't understand why the stranger kept appearing in her life. She didn't understand why he cared, but she would soon find out, because the next time they spoke, he wouldn't offer a tip. He would offer something far bigger, something that would change the entire course of her life. And at that moment, or walk away. The next day arrived with a gray sky and a biting cold that made Lena pull her scarf higher around her neck. Her apartment felt quieter than usual, emptier somehow, as she tried to ignore the weight pressing on her chest. She had been thinking all night about the stranger from the cafe and the diner, the man who seemed to appear at the exact moments when she felt cornered by her own life. He had not yet revealed what he wanted, but she felt a strange mix of curiosity and fear. She arrived at her diner shift as usual, but this time, there was a small envelope waiting on the counter addressed to her. She opened it carefully, expecting a note, maybe a number or even a tip. Instead, she found a card with a short message. "Meet me at the cafe on Oak Street. Noon. It's important." Her heart raced. The handwriting was neat, precise, and she knew immediately it was his. She debated ignoring it, walking away, and pretending she had never seen the card. But something in her gut told her this was no ordinary invitation. This could be a turning point, good or bad, but she couldn't resist the pull. By the time noon came, she walked briskly to the cafe, avoiding puddles from melted snow and the few pedestrians braving the cold. She spotted him at a small corner table, sitting as if he had been waiting for her all morning. When he saw her, he stood and gestured for her to sit. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice low and calm. "I know you don't know me well, and this might seem strange, but I need to ask you something serious." Lena's curiosity battled her caution. "Serious?" she repeated. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I want to help you. I've noticed how hard you're working, how much you're carrying on your own. I know about your mother's treatment, the bills, everything. I want to offer a way to fix it." Her eyes widened. "I can't accept help from someone I barely know." He shook his head. "Not like charity. A temporary arrangement. Something that benefits both of us. You see, my family expects me to bring someone to the Christmas gala. If I don't, there will be endless questions, gossip, and pressure I don't want. I don't want a fake relationship, but my family won't let this go. You could help me." Lena frowned. "Help you? How?" "By pretending to be my fiancé," he said simply. "For a few weeks, until the gala, and until your immediate needs are taken care of." Her heart thumped loudly in her chest. The words were unbelievable, almost surreal. Pretend to be his fiancé? For a man she barely knew? It sounded crazy, and yet he was serious. She could see it in his eyes. "What do you mean, until my needs are taken care of?" she asked cautiously. He pulled out a check from his pocket and placed it on the table. The amount was enough to cover her mother's treatment, the overdue bills, and even a few months of rent. Lena stared at the check, her hands trembling. She felt a wave of emotions: shock, relief, fear, and guilt. I can't take this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please," he said softly, leaning forward. "I know it's unusual, and I know it's a lot to ask, but I promise you, it's temporary. We act like we're engaged. My family is satisfied, and you get the help you need. No one will be hurt, and when it's over, everything goes back to normal." Lena looked down at the check again, then back at him. He wasn't joking. He wasn't smirking or testing her. He was genuinely offering a lifeline. Her mind raced. She thought of her mother lying in bed after the last treatment. Her health fragile and fragile, the bills piling up, and her brother counting on her to keep things together. This could solve everything. But at what cost? Pretending to be engaged to a stranger felt like stepping into someone else's world, a world she didn't belong to. And yet, temptation was too strong. "All right," she said finally. "I'll do it." His expression softened into a genuine smile. "Thank you. I promise this will be handled carefully. You won't regret it." That evening, Lena found herself walking into a world she had never known. Evan, as she learned his name was, took her to his family estate. It was enormous, far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The halls gleamed with polished wood and chandeliers. Staff moved silently, carrying trays and answering phones. Lena felt like she had stepped into another universe. Evan noticed her discomfort. "Don't worry," he said gently. "You won't need to do anything you're uncomfortable with. I'll guide you through this." She nodded, still trying to absorb everything. They walked through the main hall, and he showed her to a guest room prepared for her stay. It was lavish and warm, a stark contrast to her tiny apartment. She placed her bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling overwhelmed. "I'll explain everything," Evan said. "Tomorrow, we start preparing for the story we tell my family. How we met, how we got engaged, what our plans are. Don't worry, you'll have my full support." For the first time in months, Lena felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe this crazy plan would work. Maybe it would be the lifeline she needed to pull herself and her family out of the struggle that seemed unending. Over the next few days, they worked together, crafting a story that felt plausible. They rehearsed conversations, practiced gestures, and went over details. It felt awkward at first. Their worlds so different, but slowly. They began to understand each other's rhythms and mannerisms. Evan showed patience she hadn't expected. He didn't mock her, didn't make her feel out of place. He explained what was expected at family gatherings, how to address questions, even what to wear. Lena began to see that beneath his polished, confident exterior, he was also navigating a life of pressure and expectations. She, in turn, showed him her world, though briefly. When she spoke about her family and the struggles she carried, he listened quietly, not judging, only understanding. It was strange to feel comfortable with someone she had only known a few days. But there was a sincerity in him that made it easy to trust. Their rehearsals sometimes turned into long talks over coffee in the quiet of the estate's library. They laughed at their mistakes, corrected each other, and shared small stories from their lives. It felt less like practicing for a performance and more like two people learning each other's truths. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the large windows, Lena looked out at the garden blanketed in white. She felt a strange mix of awe and fear. This was her life now, in a world she had never imagined, pretending to be someone she wasn't. Yet, there was a small sense of safety here, a feeling that, for the first time, someone had her back completely. Evan noticed her quiet moment. "Everything okay?" he asked. She turned to him, smiling faintly. "Yes, I think so. It's just a lot to take in," he nodded, understanding. "I know, but we'll take it one step at a time. We're a team, remember?" "Yes," she said softly. "A team." As the days passed, the line between reality and the act they were performing began to blur. They shared meals, quiet walks around the estate, and conversations by the fireplace. The fake engagement started to feel real not because of the act itself, but because of the connection that quietly grew between them. Lena couldn't deny that. Evan's presence brought a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time, and Evan found himself looking forward to her company. Noticing the little details about her, how she laughed at small jokes, how she always put others first. how strong she was despite everything she carried, and yet both knew this was temporary. The plan had a clear end, and soon they would have to return to their separate worlds. But for now, in the quiet moments of rehearsals, shared stories and gentle laughter, they allowed themselves to feel something real amidst the pretense. The Christmas gala loomed closer, and with it, the test of their arrangement. But at this moment, in the warmth of the estate, Lena allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this unusual plan could work. Not just to solve immediate problems, but to create a space where hope, trust, and perhaps even something more could grow. The day of the Christmas gala arrived with a sky so gray it almost matched Lena's nerves. She stood in the large dressing room of the estate, adjusting the elegant gown she had been fitted for the occasion. The fabric shimmered under the lights, and for a moment she didn't recognize herself in the mirror. She had never worn anything so luxurious, never attended anything so formal. Her hands shook slightly as she smoothed the dress. Feeling the weight of the night ahead, Evan entered the room quietly, dressed sharply in a black suit that made him look both confident and approachable. He smiled at her, noticing her nervousness. "You look incredible," he said softly. "Breathe. We've rehearsed everything. Just be yourself." She tried to take a deep breath, reminding herself that this was just an act. But deep down, she knew it was more complicated than that. Being around him, sharing these moments, made the pretense feel real in ways she hadn't anticipated. The car ride to the gala was quiet at first. Snowflakes fell lightly on the windshield, and the streets were slick and slippery. Lena watched them swirl and melt, her thoughts bouncing between worry for her family and the strange, unfamiliar warmth she felt with Evan. She wasn't sure when the lines between acting and reality had blurred, but she could feel the shift when they arrived. The grandeur of the venue took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers sparkled from the high ceilings, and elegant guests moved gracefully across polished floors. The music was soft, festive, and overwhelming all at once. Guests whispered in small groups, and waiters moved through the crowd with trays of drinks and awe. "Do you figure Estar?" Evan guided her through the crowd, introducing her as his fiancée with a confidence that made her heart pound. Each introduction was met with polite smiles and approving nods. She realized that he had done this before, navigating these spaces with ease, while she felt like a fragile creature in a world built for grandeur. They reached Evan's grandmother, who smiled warmly at Lena and took her hands in both of hers. "I am so happy to finally meet you," she said, her eyes twinkling. "Evan has told me so much about you." Lena felt her face flush. "Thank you, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you too." Evan's grandmother's approving gaze eased some of her tension. For the first time, she felt a part of this world, not fully, not permanently, but just enough to believe that she could navigate it, even if only for a night. Throughout the evening, Lena moved among the guests with Evan by her side. They danced lightly when the music played, laughed at polite jokes, and made small talk that felt unnatural yet necessary. Each time someone asked about their engagement, she followed the story they had rehearsed, and Evan added details that made it believable. But as the evening progressed, something shifted. Lena found herself relaxing, smiling genuinely, laughing at Evan's quiet jokes. She noticed the subtle kindness in his gestures, the way he made sure she had a seat near warmth when she looked cold, the way he subtly guided conversations so she wouldn't feel out of place. She realized that even though this was a fake engagement, the man beside her cared for her comfort in ways that went beyond pretense. After dinner, a light snow began to fall outside. The gala had moved to a room with large windows overlooking the gardens. Guests lingered near the glass, admiring the winter scene. Lena and Evan stepped closer, their hands brushing lightly. Neither pulled away. "This is beautiful," Lena said softly, her breath fogging the glass. "Yes," Evan replied, "but not as beautiful as the company." Her heart skipped, and she looked down at her hands. She wasn't sure if he meant it as part of the act or if it was something real. The way he looked at her, though soft, earnest, with no hint of pretense, made her hope it was genuine. The snowstorm outside intensified, and soon the gala guests began to leave. The roads were treacherous, and the estate staff suggested that everyone stay overnight. It was an unexpected turn, and Lena felt a wave of anxiety. Sleeping in a stranger's home, even if it was Evan's, made her uneasy. But he reassured her gently. She realized she didn't have much choice. They spent the evening near the fireplace, sipping hot chocolate. The room was warm, the crackling fire casting dancing shadows across the walls. The world outside, with its storm and cold, felt distant and irrelevant. Lena found herself opening up, sharing stories of her family, her struggles, her fears. Evan listened silently, never interrupting, never judging. He, too, shared pieces of his life, his family's expectations, the loneliness beneath the wealth, the pressure to conform to a world he didn't fully belong to. For the first time, Lena saw him not as a billionaire or a stranger, but as a person with his own burdens. They talked for hours, laughter mingling with moments of silence that were comfortable rather than awkward. As the night deepened, Lena realized that her heart was no longer just acting along with the engagement. It was beginning to feel real. She didn't want to admit it, but the warmth, the connection, the care, they were genuine. Even if the situation wasn't, the next morning the storm had left the world outside blanketed in white. Lena and Evan stepped outside to walk through the garden. Snow crunched beneath their feet, and the cold air made their cheeks rosy. They laughed as they avoided slipping on icy patches, their hands brushing occasionally. Lena felt an unfamiliar peace, a sense that, for the first time, someone understood her completely. Evan, too, felt a pull he hadn't expected. The act of pretending to be engaged had shifted into something neither of them could ignore, but reality waited. A tabloid photographer, having somehow learned about their arrangement, snapped pictures of them in the garden. The thought of the media exposure terrified Lena. She didn't want her private struggles and this delicate, budding connection turned into public gossip. When they returned to the estate, Evan's face was serious. "We need to handle this carefully," he said. "I won't let anyone harm you or your family. We'll face it together." Lena nodded, grateful for his protection, yet afraid of what could happen if the story spread. She wanted to retreat, to run away from the complications, but she also knew she couldn't. Not when everything she had worked for, her mother's treatment, her family's stability, was within reach. Over the next few days, they managed the fallout from the photographs, carefully crafting explanations and keeping the truth hidden. Through it all, Lena and Evan spent more time together, their connection deepening. Each shared glance, each quiet conversation, built a bridge between their worlds. By the time the gala's formalities faded into memory, Lena realized she had grown attached to him in a way she hadn't expected. And Evan, too, realized that the woman he had invited into his life as a temporary solution had become someone he could no longer imagine being without. As the snow continued to fall outside, they sat together by the fire, hands intertwined. The fake engagement had brought them together, but the moments they shared, the laughter, the care, and the understanding, they were real. Both of them knew that when the storm of obligations, expectations, and media attention passed, they would have to face the truth. And in the quiet warmth of that winter morning, they both silently hoped that the truth would lead not to separation, but to something far more meaningful. The days after the gala were tense. Lena returned to her apartment briefly to check on her family, but she quickly realized she didn't have much time. The media exposure from the garden photographs had spread. Questions from curious neighbors and local reporters began piling up. She felt a surge of anxiety. This was supposed to be temporary, a simple act, but now it was tangled with attention she hadn't wanted. Evan, aware of the rising attention, insisted she return to the estate. "It's safer here," he said gently, though she noticed the worry in his eyes. "We can control the situation better if we face it together." She hesitated, torn between her desire to protect her family's privacy and the growing reliance she felt on him. Eventually, she agreed, and together they returned to the safety of his home. Over the next few days, they carefully navigated the scrutiny. Evan's family was supportive, though curious, and they crafted explanations that satisfied most questions. Lena learned to answer politely, always following the story they had rehearsed, while Evan handled the more difficult inquiries from the press. Through it all, the bond between them deepened. They laughed together in the quiet moments, shared long talks by the fireplace, and found comfort in each other's presence. The lines between act and reality blurred further, but despite the growing closeness, Lena couldn't shake the fear that this was temporary. She still carried the weight of her family's struggles and the knowledge that this arrangement had an end. She worried that when the act concluded, she would return to her ordinary life, while Evan would return to his world of wealth and expectations. She tried not to think about it, focusing instead on small daily joys, the warmth of the fire, the taste of homemade hot chocolate, the quiet companionship that had grown between them. One evening, Evan suggested a walk outside. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the estate in white, and the world felt peaceful despite the earlier chaos. They walked side by side, boots crunching against the snow, speaking softly so as not to disturb the stillness around them. "It feels different now," Lena said, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I didn't expect any of this to feel real." Ivan nodded. "Neither did I," he admitted. "I thought this would be a simple arrangement, a temporary solution. But being with you, it's changed everything. I didn't expect to care so much." Her heart thumped loudly. She had hoped he felt the same, but hearing him say it made the truth undeniable. She looked at him, searching his eyes for reassurance. "I care too," she whispered. "I didn't think I would, but I do." They paused, standing close together in the snowy garden, the world around them silent except for the soft rustle of snow falling from the trees. Without thinking, Evan reached out and took her hands in his. She didn't pull away. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his gaze, made her realize that what had started as a lie had grown into something undeniable and true. But just as she was about to let herself feel the full weight of it, a tabloid reporter appeared on the driveway. He had caught sight of them through the estate's gates and snapped several photographs before being noticed. Lena froze, panic rising, while Evan moved instinctively in front of her. "They're going to spin this story," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything we've done. Everything we've tried to keep private." Evan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle it," he said firmly. "Together." The reporter approached, demanding answers, but Evan ignored the questions. Guiding Lena back inside the warmth of the estate, he locked the doors, called security, and made it clear that they would not tolerate intrusion. Lena felt a surge of gratitude and relief. He wasn't just protecting the arrangement, he was protecting her. Later that evening, as the storm of attention calmed and the house grew quiet, Lena sat near the fireplace, lost in thought. She realized how much had changed in the short time since the fake engagement had begun. Her family's problems were being addressed, her mother's treatment secured, and she herself had found safety and stability. Yet the most unexpected change was in her heart. Evan approached quietly, sitting beside her. "I know this started as a plan," he said softly, "but it's no longer just that for me. I don't want it to end." Lena turned to him, her eyes wide. "Neither do I," she admitted. He took a deep breath, his expression serious but tender. "Then I have to be honest. The proposal, the arrangement, it was supposed to be temporary. But my feelings, they're real. What started as a lie has become the truth. And I can't imagine my life without you in it." Her heart raced. She had imagined this moment in quiet daydreams, but never believed it could happen. "I feel the same," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Evan took her hand and, without hesitation, knelt in the soft glow of the fireplace. "Lena," he said, his voice steady and full of warmth, "this time, I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to marry me for real. Will you?" Tears welled in Lena's eyes. She could feel the weight of the past weeks, the struggles, the fears and the joys all converging in this single moment. Without a second thought, she nodded, her voice breaking with happiness. "Yes." He stood and pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her close as if letting go was impossible. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent witnesses to the beginning of their new life together. In the days that followed, they shared the news carefully with family and friends, managing the story with grace. Lena's mother's treatment continued without interruption, and her family's future grew brighter. And for Lena and Evan, the pretense was over, replaced by the authenticity of love that had grown in the most unlikely circumstances. They spent the holiday season not as strangers pretending to care, but as two people who had chosen each other, who had found warmth, trust, and companionship amidst the cold challenges of life. The fake engagement had led to a real connection, and the Christmas that had begun with despair ended with hope, joy, and the promise of a shared future. Lena finally felt free from worry, free from fear, and free to embrace the love that had quietly grown between them. The snow outside glistened in the morning light, a symbol of fresh beginnings. And for the first time in years, Christmas felt like a miracle she had earned, not a burden she had to endure. After the whirlwind of the gala and the public revelation of their engagement, life began to settle into a rhythm that Lena had never imagined possible. The estate, once intimidating and unfamiliar, now felt like a home where she could breathe freely. The walls were no longer imposing. Instead, they offered warmth, comfort, and the knowledge that she was safe. The staff treated her with the respect that came from seeing her as part of the family, not just a visitor or a temporary guest. Each morning, she awoke to the soft light filtering through the tall windows, and Evan was often already awake, reviewing his work or preparing for the day. They shared quiet breakfasts in the dining room, talking about everything from family matters to small, trivial things. The simplicity of these moments made her heart feel lighter than it had in years. Her mother's treatment continued smoothly, and for the first time, Lena felt she could focus on herself without the constant anxiety of financial emergencies. Her younger brother was thriving in school, encouraged by the stability they now had. She could finally allow herself to enjoy moments without the shadow of worry hanging over her. Evan and Lena's relationship blossomed naturally. The pretense of engagement had evolved into genuine affection, trust, and a deep sense of partnership. They spent long afternoons walking in the snow-covered gardens, talking about dreams they had once thought impossible. Evan listened attentively to Lena's stories about her childhood, her ambitions, and her quiet fears, never dismissing a single detail in turn. Lena learned more about Evan beyond the public image of a billionaire. She discovered the quiet moments of solitude he cherished, his love for simple things, and the insecurities he had long hidden behind wealth and success. Their conversations, often long and unhurried, became the foundation of a bond built on honesty and mutual respect. One evening, they prepared a small holiday gathering at the estate. It was informal, intimate, and filled with warmth. Lena's family had been invited. Seeing her mother and brother settling into the luxurious surroundings without fear or stress was a joy she had never experienced before. Her mother's eyes sparkled with gratitude, and her brother could barely stop smiling at the sights and treats that surrounded them. Evan interacted effortlessly with her family, genuinely interested in their stories and eager to make them feel comfortable. The barriers that once existed between their worlds began to dissolve. Lena watched him laugh with her brother, tell her mother stories that brought smiles, and realized that he was not only trustworthy, but deeply compassionate. As the evening progressed, the snow outside thickened, coating the estate in a pristine white blanket. Guests mingled by the fire, enjoying the warmth and the aroma of fresh-baked goods. Lena felt a profound sense of belonging, a feeling she had never allowed herself to embrace fully in the past. The fake engagement had started as a necessity, but now it had become the bridge to a new life, one filled with hope, love, and stability. During a quiet moment, Lena and Evan stepped outside to the terrace. The snowflakes drifted gently around them. The world hushed under the weight of winter. They held hands, their fingers entwined naturally, and breathed in the cold, crisp air. "I never imagined life could feel like this," Lena said softly, her gaze fixed on the snowy horizon. "Not just the safety, but the peace, and you." Evan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't either," he admitted. "I thought this was just a temporary solution, something that would end soon. But being with you, it feels right, real. More real than anything I've ever known." Her heart swelled. "I feel the same. It's strange how things that start as necessity can turn into something so meaningful." They stood silently for a few moments, the quiet snow wrapping around them, the world shrinking until it felt like they were the only two people alive. It was in this stillness that they fully acknowledged the depth of their feelings. No pretense, no plan, just truth. Over the next weeks, they began planning the future. Not just a continuation of the engagement, but the building of a life together. Lena explored possibilities she had never dared to consider. From pursuing her long-held dreams to embracing the opportunities that came with being part of Evan's world, Evan, in turn, found new purpose in supporting and encouraging her. Delighting in her successes and sharing in her challenges, the media interest gradually faded. Unable to stir controversy when the story now had clarity and sincerity, friends and family adjusted to the new reality, and the estate settled into a rhythm that felt natural, warm, and inviting. Lena, once burdened by worry and survival, now experienced moments of joy, laughter, and love daily. They celebrated the next holidays, surrounded by family and friends. Each festivity filled with genuine happiness. For Lena, the transformation was profound. She realized that the Christmas that had once seemed impossible, a time of stress and despair, had become the catalyst for a new beginning. The hardships she had endured had led her to a place of love, safety, and hope. One evening, as they walked through the softly lit gardens, Evan paused and turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Lena," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "what we have, it's beyond anything I ever expected. I want us to continue building this life together. Not just as an arrangement, but as a partnership, as a family." Tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, I want that too. More than anything?" He leaned down, kissing her forehead gently, a silent promise of commitment and devotion. In that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of winter, Lena felt a sense of completion, of life finally aligning with hope, love, and safety. The struggles of the past were no longer chains, but the foundation for the life she was stepping into. They returned inside, the warmth of the fire and the laughter of family filling the halls. Lena looked around and realized how far she had come from a life of constant worry to one of security and love. From survival to flourishing. Evan's presence had been unexpected, a solution at first. But now he was her partner, her confidant, and the person with whom she would share all the joys and challenges of life. As the evening drew to a close, she reflected on the journey. The fake engagement had started as a necessity, a way to save her family and herself. But through patience, understanding, and genuine care, it had evolved into a real love story, one built on trust, kindness, and shared experiences. The Christmas season, once a source of anxiety and hardship, had become a symbol of new beginnings. Lena and Evan's hearts had found each other in the most unexpected way, and together they were ready to face the future. Not as strangers navigating different worlds, but as partners, equals, and lovers committed to a shared life filled with hope, joy, and endless possibilities. And as the snow continued to fall gently outside, covering the world in white, Lena knew one truth clearly. Sometimes life's most beautiful moments emerge from the most unexpected circumstances. And love, when real and sincere, can turn necessity into miracle.